Bum, 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 bum. Here's one last group of people coming.
It's a bit difficult to find. If
Yes.
you're not here.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, how about we make a start? My name is David, and I guess I will be chairing this session. And we'll begin with my presentation, Emerging Educational Technology Roles and Changing Organizational Structures. Then we'll go to Pani, and then if Kashin Ko shows up, then we'll go to him. And we'll have 20 minutes, 15 minutes for presentation, 5 minutes for question and answer. Okay, let's start. So I'm a final year PhD student in the University of Hong Kong, and this is a part of my PhD dissertation project, part of the findings. You can find this presentation on my blog. Okay. Yep. Oh, great. So in this presentation, I'll introduce this aspect of the research project, my conceptual framework for this aspect of the research project, how I went about collecting and analyzing data, and then I'll present some findings and discuss. Okay. So I'm talking about emerging educational technologist roles. And for teachers to change the way they teach, they need personal support. And there's a lot of literature on like coaches and mentors and champions to help teachers to learn new pedagogy and new content knowledge. And the same thing, I mean, we've seen this in maths and literacy. We also see this in information technology these days. Now, this research on these kinds of educational technologist roles is just growing now. And a part of the focus has been on the interpersonal interaction between teachers and these technologists. But we haven't taken a step back and seen how these interactions are actually designed and how they fit into the wider scheme of organizational learning. So we have an opportunity to actually see how technologists' interactions are designed, how the role itself is designed to facilitate teacher collaborative learning, not just at the teacher level, but across an entire school. So in this research project, I want to see how a technologist role is placed in the conditions of a school. And not only that, but how the interactions, so if a technologist is placed in a school, it starts interacting with different people, how all of these interactions are actually affected by the school level conditions, where it's actually placed, and what can this tell us about what's important about the placement of a role within the organization for this purpose. So this is how I conceptualize school design, school level conditions. We have things called structures. And structures refer to the designed organization, including formally designated positions, chains of command, departments, programs, and formal organizational routines. For instance, grade levels are a very common structure in schools. Subject areas are a very common structure in schools. Different types of administrative departments are common structures in schools. So, within these structures, there are interactions, and some are ad hoc, like you just kind of meet people at the water cooler. But often, many are designed, like this meeting here. Meetings tend to be designed, regular meetings, designed interactions. And they go by different names, like organizational routines or microprocesses in the literature. So to count as an organizational routine, something has to be repeated over time, recognizable to organizational members, and involve 2 or more staff members. So that's how I understand designed interaction. And because schools are complex systems, structures and interactions, they're nested and they can overlap. Okay. Now, within this literature on designing organizations as structures and interactions, a lot of it relies on American mainstream schools. We don't really have a lot of information about designing schools as learning organizations for technology integration in other nations, in other school types, and other contexts. So my research is an opportunity to explore new kinds of structures, design interactions, and roles for teacher collaborative learning of technology. In the context of Singapore, not only Singapore, but private international schools, which are not mainstream schools, but have different features, organizational features, that can lead to new kinds of structures and design interactions. So this is how I went about collecting data and analyzing data. So for this particular aspect of my research project, I wrote 2 embedded cases. I'm studying a technologist in a school. Although there may be many technologists with the same role in one school, I'm studying one technologist with that role in one school. And so that helps me to bound the scope of my data collection. I'm collecting information about that technologist's role in that school. So I interviewed several times 2 technologists, and each belongs to a private international school in Singapore. I interviewed them and I interviewed their close working colleagues. I interviewed them several times. I asked them questions about curriculum, job description, professional development, performance appraisal, organizational affiliations, professional background, and other policies and regulations. I asked them about these categories, what had been influential in either hindering or aiding what they do in schools. I also asked them about their interactions with colleagues, asking them to provide successful experiences with them, but also conflict and tension experiences with their colleagues and their work. And then in subsequent interviews, I asked follow-up questions about specific structures and design interactions that they mentioned in their initial interviews. So I used observations of design interactions. I made 2 site visits and I observed several interactions. I also took a look at the policy documents from the school to understand the school level conditions where each technologist was placed. And I also looked at artifacts from designed interactions. And the observation notes and the artifacts and documents are methodological triangulation for the interviews. Most of the data I get for this, for the cases comes from the interviews. So in coding, what I was looking for to answer these questions is I'm looking for structures and looking for design interactions when I'm examining the school level conditions. And then to understand the feedback interactions, the actual interacting between this role and other school stakeholders, well, I'm looking for what actually happens. What are the outcomes of this interaction? How formal is interaction? What's the focus, the technological focus of this interaction? What are they learning about? And then what are the involved structures and stakeholder groups? Are we dealing with teachers here, parents here, students here? At what level in the school? And these were some of the sample codes that I started to create for these categories. I used NVivo for this. Oh, nuts. Okay, so ultimately, for writing up, I identified many prominent technological foci, and I could see how these foci, a focus, for instance, develops through several interactions. So for writing up my case, I chose, for each case, the most prominent technological focus in the data, and then that bound the scope of my writing up about the feedback interactions. So I wrote about the feedback interactions related to one technological focus. Not only that, but in writing about the school level conditions, I only wrote about the school level conditions that directly influenced or were mentioned in the interactions about that technological focus. So choosing the technological focus helped me it bounded the writing of my cases. Okay. So now we're going to take a look at some of the findings of these cases. So now I'm going to take a look at the school level conditions for School F, one of the largest and most prestigious private international schools in Singapore, and School G, another one of the largest and most prestigious private international schools in Singapore. And there are a few things I want to point out about their conditions, and particularly their structures and designed interactions. One is both actually had strategic plans for technology integration in their school. And in my other cases, in my PhD research project, we see examples of schools that actually don't have strategic plans. They have these roles, but they don't have these strategic plans. So these two schools had strategic plans, well-documented strategic plans for technology integration for their school. And in these plans, they lay out certain kinds of structural changes. This includes the adoptions of new technologies. So both were becoming Apple schools. They explicitly stated we're transitioning to Apple hardware and software. Not only that, but School G was saying we're also going to introduce Google Apps and blogs as technological innovations in our school. Now, both had also created these new technologist roles in view of their strategic plans. So they called their technologist role the digital literacy coach at School F. And they assigned each school section a digital literacy coach. So this school has 2 campuses, and on each campus they have several school sections, like a high school, a middle school, a junior school, and an infant school. So ultimately there were 8 digital literacy coaches, and I'm studying one digital literacy coach, Sam, who was assigned to the junior section of one campus, and that junior section encompasses grades 5, 4, and 3. Okay, and then at School G, their educational technologist roles, well, they actually developed 2. One was called the educational technology coach, and the other was called the educational technology coordinator. And these roles were assigned at grade level. So this school has one campus and several school sections, a high school, like a middle school, an elementary school, and then a lower school. And each grade level had one of these coaches. So we already see a difference that this guy, Sam, has 3 grade levels to take care of, and Steve, my representative educational technology coach, is assigned to grade 2 in the primary school. Okay. Things to point out. So this is how they're being structured according to strategic plans. Now, there are also some interactions that are being designed for them. How are they going to engage people? And what we see is that School F and School G are de-emphasizing computer lessons. As part of our strategic plans, well, School F got rid of computer lessons. So they actually no longer have any formal compulsory time to engage students. In contrast, School G is reducing computer lessons. So Steve still has to teach students, but in fact, he only has to teach 1 class a day, and then he has a lot of discretionary time. We see that there are other interactions created for Steve. And this includes weekly meetings with all of the educational technology coaches and coordinators in the school. So that's another designed interaction for him. You must go to this meeting for all the ed tech coaches and coordinators in the school. Not only that, but then there's also weekly meetings with just the ed tech coaches and coordinators in his primary section. Okay, so right now, according to strategic plans, Steve is going to be interacting with students daily. He's going to be interacting weekly with all of the ed tech coaches and coordinators in the school, and then also just the ed tech coaches and coordinators in his primary section. According to the strategic plans for Sam, Sam actually has no designed interactions. So he just has discretionary time. But the plans do say that the school is going to develop new design interactions for training for technology, perhaps during free periods, lunchtime, and after school. One final thing to point out, which is very, very important, is Sam designed his role. So there are 8 DLCs in this school, but Sam actually designed his role. He actually wrote his own job description. And his role is unique amongst all the other DLCs in the school because he has aligned himself with the curriculum unit in his school. So that also means that he's going to be interacting regularly with the vice principal for curriculum, the grade curriculum coordinators, and teachers to map curriculum. So that actually makes his role very different because he aligned himself also with his school section's curriculum. So what happens ultimately is Sam attends these curriculum team meetings, and the purpose is to map curriculum. So he uses a skills matrix that he developed, and he identifies in select curriculum units in grades 3, 4, and 5 that they need to work on some video, that they can introduce video, and this can change teaching and learning outcomes. So they say, okay, you know what, we're going to introduce iMovie into select curriculum units in grades 3, 4, and 5. So how do you actually do that? Sam has all of this discretionary time, right? He had no design interactions originally. Well, he creates 2 interactions that get him the time to meet with teachers and students to facilitate learning about iMovie. One is called Team Time. Sam discovered that teachers in each grade level twice a week had non-contact time. So there were 2 times each week where teachers all gathered together and they didn't have to teach students. So he actually went in during that time and still goes in during that time to help facilitate teacher collaborative learning of technology. And it takes on different forms. Sometimes it can be very, very step-by-step. Sometimes it's just answering questions. So it has a very flexible format. In addition, Sam designed this interaction where during lunchtime, he teaches 2 students, how would I describe this? He teaches 2 students from each class at each grade level about a technological innovation, in this case, iMovie. And then these 2 students go back to their class in their grade level, and during lesson times, teach the teacher and the students about the technological innovation, this being iMovie. In addition, the school created a designed interaction called Tech Mentors, and these are enthusiast teachers who supplement the digital literacy coach in assisting teachers in learning about innovation. But that had problems because they didn't meet regularly, while Techsperts and Team Time were regular meetings, weekly meetings. So ultimately, I'd like to point out that iMovie ended up being taught and affecting pedagogical practice in every class, in every grade level in that school section. Not only that, but the following year it would be the same, but with changes. Because as Sam attends these grade curriculum coordinator meetings, they can discuss and have feedback, and they realize, well, in this curriculum unit, iMovie wasn't so successful, so we'll introduce iMovie in this curriculum unit. In addition, the following year, Sam was transferred to another school section, and he planned on introducing these designed interactions, Team Time and Techsperts, into those grade levels. And the person who replaced him would continue administering Team Time and Techsperts in the junior section. I'm going over time. Let me just quickly talk about Steve. Okay. Now, Steve introduced blogging into grade 2. How did he do this? Well, because he met his primary section ed tech team, they were given a task, a professional development task, to have a goal for the year. And they decided, well, you know what, let's introduce blogging but only to grades 1 and to grade 2. And the ed tech coach for grade 1 would do it in a different way, and ed tech coach in grade 2 would do it in a different way. And our objective is not to actually change teachers' practice. Our objective is just to try to introduce it. So what's special is there weren't any designed interactions originally for Steve to interact with teachers. So what he tried to do was create these interactions, and he ended up creating blogs for all of the teachers in the grade level. But a lot of the teachers were very uncomfortable with blogging, and there was a lot of resistance. So ultimately, he made adopting blogging in classroom practice voluntary. 3 teachers out of 13 teachers in the grade level volunteered. And at the same time, the principals, in meeting with the principals, Steve was receiving a lot of mixed messages. While the principals were supportive of Steve's blogging initiative, they were also very protective of the teachers, making sure that they weren't overloaded. So he was getting mixed messages from the principals. So ultimately, Steve did a lot of work to facilitate blogging on his own, alone, using his discretionary time. And in these 3 lessons, there was blogging. But to the extent to which it was sustained, well, it wasn't very, very clear. Okay. So let me just discuss briefly what we can see, what we can tease out about the differing school conditions and the feedback interactions. So we see that, in summary, the schools have new technology structures, and they're also reforming their computer subject structures, introducing new technologies. And we see differences in the way that the technologist's role is placed into different organizational structures. And even for Sam, he placed himself in the curriculum structure as well, not just the school section grade level structures. And we see different kinds of design interactions. But what's important to note is that School F, Sam's school, promised new interactions. They intended to create new interactions. There's no such mention of that for Steve and people with his role in his school. So taking a look at the feedback interactions, what can we learn? Well, I would argue that Steve was not as successful as Sam in facilitating collaborative learning of educational technology in terms of the number of teachers that he actually reached. And why is this the case? Why was Sam arguably more successful? Well, for one thing, Sam was actually interacting with teachers, and he was designing interactions with teachers. And Steve was not designing interactions. In fact, he was doing a lot of the work for blogging by himself, and he was tinkering. In addition, we have to take a look at who Steve was interacting with and who Sam was interacting with, and what the focus of those interactions were. So Steve was interacting with students in a particular way that may have been detrimental to widespread technology integration. He was still teaching computer lessons. He was also interacting with principals and getting mixed messages from them. And then when he was interacting with teachers, initially it was conflict and tension filled. Whereas Sam was working with the curriculum team and focusing specifically on mapping the curriculum and mapping technology, specific technologies such as iMovie to curriculum units. And that points out the importance of curriculum alignment as a focus for interactions and also for legitimizing technological innovation. Finally, we see that, ironically, although it seems Sam had a more daunting task at being responsible for more teachers, with the right kinds of interactions and foci, it was actually an opportunity to scale learning, not only across a grade level, but across multiple grade levels. Thank you. you have any questions?
Um,
Yes,
No.
Penny?
I just think the end of the schedule is